And what I'm going to do, and I don't know whether either of you guys have had the opportunity before to meet Dan Crawford in person, but I sent a whole lot of bio information in the email, and instead of spending a whole bunch of time on an introduction, we're just going to jump into the interview, because what I told Dan that I would have him do is, as he answers a question, the part of his bio that's important to answer the question, he can share that at the time. But I'm sure that the part of his bio that he's the most proud of is that quite a few years ago, there was at least one director of missions that's on this call that was one of his students in a seminary class. So I'm sure that's one of his claim to fame. But
I can run,
anyway,
but I can't hide. They're everywhere.
yeah. There's thousands of those around. They're not all directors of missions, but they're all kinds of other things. So anyway, we're really glad to have you today, and I'm just going to jump on into this. What we're talking about today is the ministry of prayer walking, and I know that because part of Dan's resume has to do very much with prayer and with missions and other things like that. I know he's got some experience with that. And so, Dan, why don't you just begin by kind of sharing with us just your experience, perspective on that ministry of prayer walking, and then the parts of your bio that are pertinent to that.
Sure. When I prayer walking, I don't think anybody had named it that yet. At least it wasn't popular enough for me to even know what to call it. I pastored one church in college and pastored another church while I was in seminary, and then Baptist General Convention of Texas hired me to be the Baptist student director at Pan American University, which is now UT Rio Grande Valley. And I knew nothing. I'd never had a course in collegiate ministry. I'm not even sure they taught one back then. In addition to that, there I was on the campus of probably at that time 7,000 or 8,000 people. Most of them, probably 90% plus, were Hispanic background, and they spoke Spanish at night. And I didn't know much about that either. So I just started walking around the campus praying. That's what I knew how to do. And I remember clearly from my seminary student days, Dr. Fish talking about the break. The old revival meetings, they would pray until the break came, and then they would have revival. So not knowing what to call any of it, I was just kind of walking around praying for the break. Just anything that would happen, be happy to be a part of that. So that was in the late 1960s, early 70s. In the early 70s, I got a part of a conference that they had for collegiate ministers with a lady named Rosalind Rinker. You may have heard of her name. Years ago, she wrote a book on conversational prayer. And that was a little bit different. I grew up where you had to say thee and thou and so forth. And it was very formal kind of prayer. Not the wrong kind, just that was the way we did it. And here was a whole new idea. I could talk to God like a friend, we could just talk together in normal language. We didn't have to use King James. And that really impressed me. So that became a part of my prayer walking experience. And I could just move around whatever I was doing and talk to God like he was walking around with me. It was really the early 90s when a book came out by Steve Thorne and Graham Kendrick. It was called Prayer Walking, Praying on Site with Insight. As far as I know, that was the first time anybody named this, unless you go way back. And I'll pick up a little later and talk about why or why not this is biblical. But if you think it's biblical, then it started back then. But as far as current ideas of prayer walking, it was a book that sort of launched it. And then I began to take seminary student teams all over the place, all around the world to pray. Missionaries were very interested in having prayer teams come to their countries, and we were more than happy to provide seminary students an opportunity to see another part of the world and see if maybe God was calling them there. So that's my background into prayer walking. Somebody introduced me as an expert in prayer walking, and then expert was somebody who made mistakes in the small field of endeavor. So maybe that's how you can classify me, because we just learned by doing. We didn't know how to do it. We didn't know what we were doing, but we learned that prayer walking. Well, I'll probably get into that later. Is a bit of a misnomer. There's more than walking. I'll maybe get the next question, and that'll come up somewhere along the way.
Okay. Right. Well, then let's just move on to the next question, because I think that's probably a pretty good segue at that point. So, what does that really look like? What are the kind of the logistical things of it, besides just walking around talking to God?
And that part's the misnomer. Prayer walking doesn't really limit itself to walking. Somebody asked me if I could come to their church and do a brief seminar on prayer walking. I can do one for about 30 seconds. If you know how to walk, you know how to pray, put those together. And that's really about all you need. But it's more than walking. It's prayer running, prayer driving, prayer jogging, biking. The missionaries in London designed a brochure called Prayer Tube. If you've ever been to London, the subway is called the Tube. And they designed this little booklet. A fantastic thing where you can pray along through the city of London. And if you wanted to go up on ground level, be up at that stop, and you could go pray for whatever was on that list. So just, moving around, praying. I got an invitation too late in life to accept it, to lead a prayer walk by floating down the Nile River. And my one question was, where are we going to spend the night? They said, on the banks. And I said, no, thank you. I think I'm a little too old to float down the Nile River. But, another interesting idea. They were going to float down the river, pray for the people groups along the banks. And I thought that was a great idea for someone that was young. So prayer walking is not limited to walking. I think every class I ever taught with that in it, including one faculty meeting where we tried to put through a course on intercessory prayer journey, I was facing the question of, but that's not in the Bible. And the answer is, you're right. It's the term prayer walking is not in the Bible, but it's a strategy. It's a method. And when people would challenge me to say, you can't do that, it's not in the Bible, I would say, okay, for the next class period, bring me all the verses in the Bible that have to do with closing your eyes when you pray. And of course, there are not any. And usually they would not bring that up the next class meeting until I did. And say, well, we didn't find any. Well, you're right, there are not any. So I'll make a deal with you. If you'll let me close my eyes when I pray, I'll keep walking when I pray, and I'll let you close your eyes when you pray. It doesn't have to be chapter, verse, reference method. Intercessory prayer is the principle, and particularly intercessory prayer without ceasing, as James said. T.W. Hunt, I suppose, counted him. He came up with the idea that 78% of the prayers in the Bible were intercessory prayers. So when you talk about prayer walking, we're not talking about a biblical principle here. We're talking about a method, strategy of a biblical principle. So that's what it looks like to me.
And I guess you've already answered this a little bit, but I guess a why here. And it's not a bad question anytime we're talking about a methodology or a strategy, but what is it about this methodology that maybe a good way to ask the question is, what is the uniqueness of this methodology that maybe calls our attention, draws us in a particular way that makes this a valid kind of prayer ministry?
I think it allows, or maybe encourages is a better word, encourages continual communication with God, as opposed to, well, my prayer time is 5 a.m. or 10 p.m. or something like that. This method allows for ongoing prayer, which allows you to talk to God about people before you talk to people about God, just as you move around in whatever circumstances you're in. The missionaries that invited us and the missionaries that I knew and former students that have become missionaries all talked about it in terms of the first step. They said, you know, we're told we have to go out and sow seed, but the ground is hard. And so prayer walking is like watering the ground before you sow seed. And I like that analogy or whatever situation. I thought it was a good way of putting it all in perspective. And where does prayer walking fit to the overall mission strategy? And many of the missionaries were saying that it's first. That's what we do. And it reminded me of from my missions professor when I was a seminary student, Dr. Cal Guy said, even rock soil will produce if you water it with enough. I think missionaries that were discovering that if they prayed, wept over the people group, it would in one way kind of moisten the soil in which they could plant seeds of the gospel.
I know that, and by the way, and you may mention this a little bit because I know I asked you to talk about some possible resources, but Dr. Crawford wrote a book together with Calvin Miller on prayer walking, and actually I can send a link to that. I downloaded the Kindle and read it a few months ago. But I know that, and even some of what you described, and in missions context, in places where maybe there's not yet a church, there's not yet a work going on, and I know that's certainly a big part of that. What would it look like? And I guess my real question is for a church to take that approach in their community. There's already a church there, but what might be the value of a church? And one of the things in the background of some of what we're talking about in our association is if two churches that were in close proximity to each other decided to make that a partnership project in their community, what might be the value of trying to take that approach in our communities?
I learned from a church in California, this particular way of doing it, and have done this in several churches where I've been interim pastor. In the church in California was in an area where they were having a lot of drive-by shootings. So I think they did door hangers, but they communicated with everybody around their church. And the door hanger said, warning, drive by, and then in smaller print, prayer meeting. And then it explained that on a particular day, our church will be driving through the neighborhood in marked vehicles, praying for our neighbors. And if you have a prayer request, feel free to share it with us. If you see us going by, come out to the curb, whatever. I did that several churches, and it worked well. It takes somebody that can draw some maps and help people know which streets are theirs, and a little bit of training, which would have to do with how long to stay and pray with somebody and what to do and what not to do. Try to convince people, no, this is not an evangelistic outreach. This is sort of like public relations prayer. You go back to the old quote that says they don't care what you know until they know you care. Well, all you're doing is saying, we want to pray for you. I'm taking names. We don't expect you Sunday morning unless you'd love to come. We'd love to have you. but we're just praying for our neighborhood. That works so well. Several places work so well where we would start with a breakfast on Saturday morning and a little bit of training, but not much, and then send them on their ways, and at least 2 people per vehicle, maybe more. Bring them back for lunch to share their experiences. Worked so well that in the first 2 or 3 of those I did, there were folks that didn't get back for lunch. And the reason was so many neighbors were on the curb waiting for them that they didn't have time to cover all the territory back in time for lunch. So I think that proved that that's a good method. That's something any church can do. It's prayer riding. It's not walking, although you could walk the neighborhood on the size of the neighborhood. And it does get the attention of neighbors.
Sure. The one other thing that I want to be sure and ask, and then I'm going to give these guys a chance to ask some questions as well, and then we'll just see how long that goes, and then wrap up at the end. But if you were going to say, okay, here's some 2 or 3 ideas to help a church get started with that, and what would your top ideas and resources kind of be for that?
One thing I like to do, and if I can get people to do it along with me, it seems to work better. And that is to pray as I walk around the church facilities on Sunday morning. I don't know, maybe these guys teach Sunday school or something, but I don't do that. So I'm walking around somewhere and walking up down halls and just praying for people as I talking to God about the people. There again, talk to God about the people before you talk to the people about God. I always seem to make my sermons go better when I had been mixing up with the people, maybe finding the ones that are around the coffee pot, praying for them, maybe walking around the parking lot, just praying for people. I try to encourage folks to do that. Everybody walks around during Sunday school, and some of them walk around during worship service. Just pray for the people. Another thing that actually, I think I picked this up with a seminary group. We were in Southern California. We went to visit Crystal Cathedral for fun when it was still the Crystal Cathedral.
Yeah.
And there's a plaque on the end of every row. And if you go down the row, a lot of the seats, they have theater seats instead of pews. A lot of the seats have little plaques on the name. And the names will be, so-and-so from Alabama, so-and-so from Tennessee. And so we quickly asked what are all those for, and they said, those are our prayer partners. Of course, what they did was raise money by sending you the right to have a seat in the Crystal Cathedral and with your name on it. But the deal was you're supposed to pray every Sunday for whoever sits in that seat. And I didn't want to take that and raise any money with it, but it's not a bad way to do it, to actually prayer walk the worship center. And then I found that people were already doing that. So I had a good idea. Somebody else had it too. We did that at First Baptist Theater the first time I was interim pastor, when we moved from the Family Life Center. I don't know if that's what they call it. The gym, it smells like a gym, but it's Family Life Center, I guess. And they moved from there into their state-of-the-art worship, or at least state-of-the-art when they moved. So on the Sunday night before move, we did a little bit of training, a little bit of this is what we're going to do. And then everybody left the Family Life Center and went into the worship center. And we walked all over the place. They walked up and down rows. They walked in the balcony. They walked on the platform. Some of them got in the baptistry. They just went everywhere, praying for that next Sunday and what might happen the next Sunday. interesting thing, the next Sunday, we started the worship service at the Family Life Center. And then I said, now we're all going to get up and leave. If you've always wanted to do this, we're just going to leave. But we're going over to the worship, to the new facility. So we stopped the service, let the choir out first so they could robe. And then we all moved over to the auditorium. And what we did over there was have a prayer meeting that we could soon fill that building, not knowing that in 2 weeks would be 9/11 and we'd fill it the Sunday after that, like everybody else did. That's what we were asking, but that's what God delivered. But just, prayer walking around the facility. Started doing that at Wedgwood Baptist home church after the shooting 20 years ago, of just people coming early on Sunday morning and walking around, sometimes outside the building if the weather was nice, sometimes inside, just walking around the facility praying. So those are easy. You just got people that are willing to do it.
Are there any resources, books, anything along those lines that you would recommend to somebody that said, I want to do a little bit deeper dive into this?
That's the one that Calvin Miller and I wrote. Actually, Calvin didn't write a whole lot of it, but he did write some of it. That's a book that was written. We were asked to write it by the International Mission Board after a 3-week round the world prayer journey. And we, a team of 5, went through China, India, Yemen, and out through Western Europe, basically touching on all the major world religion countries of those groups. Half of the book is a journal of that trip. And the other half is a how-to manual on how to do a prayer journey, or my definition of a prayer journey is going anywhere around the world or around the country to pray for the primary purpose of praying. Sometimes you go on a mission trip and you spend one day praying or something. No, this would be where you go strictly to pray. That's one. The one I mentioned earlier, Steve Hawthorne and Greg Hendrick, prayer walking, praying on site with insight. It's still available for those Amazon and other sources. It's not a very good book biblically because they stretch the points and they take things out of context to make prayer walking biblical. So if you can overlook the biblical background of the book, methodology wise, it's a good book. Let me think. I wrote them down somewhere here. Some years ago, and I don't know if this is still, the North American Mission Board put out a resource kit called Taking Prayer to the Streets. Thomas Wright was on staff there. He's now in Mobile, Alabama. He put that together, and it was excellent resource. Like I say, I assume it's still available somewhere. Same thing with the International Mission Board. When Randy was the prayer coordinator for the board, a book called Follow Me, Lessons for Becoming a Prayer Walker. And I think it was published, I know it was published by the WMU Publishing. Is that New Life, New something? Publishers in Birmingham. And I think that one is still available, Randy's book. I don't think anything has been written recently. Those books, those resources were all written when you might say prayer walking was hot. Everybody wanted to do it. So everybody wanted to write a book. And other than on the mission field, prayer walking has kind of declined in popularity. I think the reason it's so popular on the mission field is the closer you get to the front lines, the more you talk to God. So prayer walking, prayer is much more a priority among missionaries in cross-cultural settings than it is in Texas and Oklahoma and Alabama.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let open it up to you other guys, and any questions you might have, or other observations, or something that Dan can help us with while we've got him here today.
I appreciate the information. The signal is cutting in and out. It's clipping in and out every once in a while. I don't know if anybody else is having that trouble. And so I'm taking notes and I'm appreciating the information. There was one insignificant statement that was made. And so I'm only asking because nothing else is being asked at the time. But Dr. Crawford, you mentioned that you, after the Crystal Cathedral experience, you were serving, I think, interim, maybe, I think you said for a second time, but the signal was clipping in and out. And it was before you mentioned Wedgwood. I think it was a church that you served that you said y'all were in maybe the transition from one building to another building. And
First Baptist Decatur. First Baptist Decatur.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool. Very cool. I didn't hear where that was. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's insignificant, but I was just curious.
I've got a question. Have you ever given your groups or teams, when they go out to pray, ever given them specific prompts, specific, things to pray for, ways to remember, whether it's an acrostic or, just specific things to pray? Obviously, if you're going, through a neighborhood, it might be more evangelistic. If you're going, depending on different areas of the church, you might be praying for different things. But do you have a typical set of, prompts or guided prayer that you help them with?
Yes.
Not a guided prayer, but prompts to say, if you see tricycles in the front yard,
yeah,
it might lead you to pray for the children in the neighborhood. There's some things like that. I've heard people pray for some of the strangest things that I never thought to pray for, which is one of the values of praying on site with insight. You don't see these things if you're in a prayer room.
Right.
To go under a power line and pray for God's power. Stop sign, stop light. I heard somebody pray something like, "Dear God, caution the people along to stop." Got the caution light, the green light, and the red light all into the prayer. So there are some things like that, to be sensitive. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard. You hear a siren in the distance. That's a prompt to pray for first responders, or maybe the person that's in the hospital, in the ambulance. Passing schools, churches. Yeah, I've got a list of things to kind of help them know what for. But then I really encourage them to be creative.
Yeah.
When you're praying with your eyes open and your ears open, there's no wrong thing.
Right.
Just be creative with it. I was in London and the teams had gone out. I ended up by myself. So I took the tube to, I can't think, Grisham Street, I think, Grisham Drive or something. Just kind of on a whim. I wasn't going anywhere particularly, but I wanted to pray in some neighborhoods. So I got off and I walked about a half a block, and there was the Brixton Mosque. I knew there was some reason that I knew about Brixton Mosque. I couldn't figure out what it was. I found out later. The Brixton Mosque is where the plot was designed for 9/11.
Wow.
And the funds that were raised to finance the 9/11 attack were funneled through the Brixton Mosque. Another block, and on the next corner was a Baptist. Now, people in London don't drive a lot because there's no parking. So to go to that church, which is a pretty good sized building, I have no idea what kind of church or anything about the church. It's not a criticism of the church, But to go to that church, I would assume people would ride the tube. They'd walk that block. There's a church. Then they walk back. And I got to thinking, I wonder what would have happened if people had prayed for that mosque back and forth, Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. I don't know. Just kind of wondering. But I use that illustration sometimes to say to people, don't ignore anything. If God directs your attention towards something, that may well be an object of prayer.
Yeah.
Don't hesitate even to pray for the mosque or the temple or whatever shows up as you're going about. We were in a meeting in Vancouver, weren't we, Dave? Were you at a meeting in Vancouver?
Yes, I was.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
That's where I met you. Yeah.
Yes.
I've taken a lot of prayer teams to Vancouver.
Yeah.
If they'll open the border, I'll go back.
Yeah, Dave and I've been talking about that too, looking forward to the next opportunity to go to Vancouver.
I'm hurting. I need my Tim Hortons fix.
You know, I've actually done what you suggested. I've taken 2 trips to China with to work with teams that were International Mission Board teams over there. And on one of those occasions, that's exactly what we did, is we just walked through some of the smaller villages and rural areas, and we just prayed. The missionary would tell us, you know, specifics about that area and what some of the challenges were, what some of the opportunities were. And we would just walk and pray. And so it was meaningful for me, I know. And, you know, hearing from those missionaries that it was beneficial and impactful for the work there as well. So.
Yeah. Ken, did he introduce you as the minister of worship music?
At First Baptist Bowie.
Okay, but that's your title. You do
Yes.
the music. Yeah.
Correct.
I've had a number of groups that preferred singing as they walked. And then that too, that opens up a whole new realm, because obviously many of the songs we sang are prayers. It just as things come to mind. Any of you know the Woodlands?
Fellowship of the Woodlands.
What's the guy? Shook.
Yeah.
Carrie.
Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
This is an old story. I don't know what the status is with that church now, but when they were starting, they kept outgrowing places. They were growing so fast. They were outgrowing facilities. And a new school opened, a huge auditorium or cafetorium or something. I don't know what it was. They wanted to use that, and they talked to the principal, and he said, absolutely not. If we let you, we'll have to let everybody, which is the standard excuse. And so Carrie told him, well, okay, said, don't mind us, but some of us are going to be walking around the school praying. And we're not going to bother anybody. We'll be on the sidewalk. We won't be on school property. And we're just going to walk and pray. And what are you going to pray? Well, we're going to pray that you'll change your mind. And he said, as they walked, they began to sing, God can make a way where there is no way. That's an old song. But that was what came to their mind. And they're singing it over and over. And it took about a week or two, and the principal called and said, I give up. Before you guys blow a trumpet, you can have it. And that was, according to him, was a big boost in their growth, because it greatly increased the size of a worship facility. And then they continued to grow. And last I heard, they were 4,000 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's been several years ago. But music can be a very good part of the prayer walking. Now, last year with Dr. Bob Garrett, now he was in our group of 3 weeks around the world, and he knows the first line of nearly all, but that's all. So he'd sing the first line, and then if somebody didn't know the rest of it, we were in trouble. But we kidded him about just, why didn't you learn the whole hymn? Sing a bunch of first lines.
You know, when you talk about schools, that's one of the things that I have probably seen a little bit more of, and particularly in some of the challenging things over the past few years with school shootings and other things, I have seen either churches or groups of churches in a community at the beginning of the school year. We're going to go around to the various schools in the district and pray around them. And so those are some things that do happen sometimes. And I guess, when we think about what are the things that get people's attention and remind us that maybe prayer might be a good thing to do. I'm just silly enough to think that a lot of our time would be better spent praying than it would be politicking, but that's just me.
We've actually had we've actually since COVID hit, we moved from the pass the plate Lord's Supper to the prepackaged, that we actually just go ahead and set out in the pew backs before the service. And that's what we've encouraged our deacons to do as they set those out, is pray for the person who's going to sit in this seat as you're praying, as you're setting those out. And I think it's been meaningful for them to really think in terms of, instead of we're going to prepare it in the kitchen and then just bring it out in trays, that they're actually walking up and down aisles where people are going to sit. So that's, I appreciate that you drew attention to that.
Good idea. And it's a week late. We had Lord's Supper last Sunday.
We're doing it this Sunday, and we've got everybody set up to show up early to do that.
Well, yeah. I'm at Oak Grove Baptist in Burleson, and we have chairs.
Mm-hmm.
There's nowhere to put anything.
Oh yeah.
But so they actually serve the Lord's Supper person to person.
Okay.
The deacons didn't touch the cups. People,
right?
And the cracker was in one of the cups.
Mm-hmm.
They passed the cup twice, and
yeah,
to take out a cup. But I didn't think to have them praying for the people as they went. That's a good idea. I'll tell them they missed that.
When I was a pastor, that's one of the things that I did early on Sunday morning before anybody else got there, is just walk through the worship center. And of course, when you're at a place for a long time, like I was, I'm visualizing who I know is going to be sitting in this seat, 3 hours from now, and praying for that person by name. And there's been a number of times that I have, walked. Usually happen on a Wednesday night. We're focusing on prayer, but walk through the entire building and go in each Sunday school room and pray for that class and that teacher, and walk around the building on the outside, and so there are a lot of different ways of doing that. And I guess really for me, one of the dreams that I have for our association is that we might see, as I mentioned before, some churches that share a community to say we're going to focus our prayer on the kingdom, and not just pray that we're going to be able to get people to come in our building, but Dave and Conan gets together with Patrick Hill and they prayer walk around the area over around Bethel, and then they prayer walk the area over around First Baptist, and maybe get together with David Ojeda from Nueva Vida, and then Ken and their church and Bowie to get together with the folks at Southside and other things, and say we're encouraging our people to get together and focus on the kingdom of God and pray over our communities. And
I thought you could also in leading up to school starting in the fall, you could ask for access to the school if they'll let you in there and walk the halls of the school and pray for teachers and pray for students and the coming school year, because that would also be something that we could do with other churches here in our area.
Yeah.
I knew of a church that every year they prayer walk the schools on Tuesday before Steve at the pole.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Praying for the students,
mm-hmm.
that would actually gather. And I just thought that spoke volumes to the teenagers.
Yeah.
So that their parents and their adult church members and grandparents all were out there for them.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I've seen some on the See You at the Pole day that some churches and parents things have gotten together like across the street from the school to pray for the students as they're praying. And, and I know here in Azle where I live, there's a number of times at the beginning of the school year, they've done a prayer drive around the whole school district and said, we're going to start at the high school at 4:00 on Sunday afternoon, and we're going to drive around every school in the school district. So a lot of different ways of doing that.
Government
we're-
buildings, courthouses, government buildings, police departments, fire departments. Those are all places that, just sort of cry out for somebody to intercede for them.
Yeah. We're about to the end of our time. Go ahead, Ken.
I had another question. In Dr. Crawford, in your experience with this, what have been maybe the primary settings where the prayer walking focus has been one step of a larger strategy that you were hoping to accomplish? Like it would be like maybe number 2 on a strategic effort to do, and then what's that final thing? When have you used it, incorporated it, that it was one portion of a larger process? What have those been? I mean, I know ways that I would use it, have used it, and I'm just curious, what are some of the ways that y'all have used it?
In some of the small town, not necessarily small churches, but small town churches where revival meetings are still held. This is a good pre-revival activity. It gets people involved, gets them focusing on not only on prayer, but beyond prayer to the revival meeting. Those are becoming less and less because obviously fewer churches are having revival meetings. As I said, on the mission field, this becomes priority 1. Let's saturate an area with prayer, and then let's go back and see if we can talk to people in the area. I just always have been willing to adapt what I do with prayer walking to what the church wants to focus on. And I just 2 months ago in Bossier City, Louisiana. I'm trying to think of the name of the church. Airline.
Yeah, Airline in Bossier. I know it.
Okay. Well, they were going to have a special Easter evangelistic event. And Terry Young, I believe, Terry Young invited me to come and do some training ahead of time. And one of the things I was encouraging them to do was to pray for their neighbor. Pray for I noticed a huge high school just a few blocks from the church, to be praying for things around them as they prepared for this evangelistic emphasis. So it's the kind of thing you can adapt it to nearly any program that the church wants to adapt it and attach it to. I was leading in one of those in Abilene. There was a breakfast and then go prayer walk, and come back for lunch. And one of my college friends showed up. And I said, I didn't know you remember this church. He said, I am. And I said, well, I'm glad you're here. He said, I just wanted to know if there's anybody who could spend an hour talking about prayer walking, something so simple that they could take an hour to talk about it. And I showed him. It's like we've done here. We've spent an hour talking about prayer walking. His concept was, if you can walk and pray, you ought to put them together and do it. So why do we have to have an hour's worth of training? And I think he's the kind of guy that can't walk and chew gum, so I'm not sure he can walk and pray at the same time. But he agreed that I did say take an hour to talk about it.
Well, sometimes we have to walk through the complexity to get to the simplicity.
So, yeah.
It's like all of us were a part of a meeting a while back that we spent 2.5 hours to get to 3 sentences, but it took that long to get there.
Yeah.
Well, anything else before we wrap up for today? I appreciate, Dan, I appreciate you coming and sharing this time with us, and Ken and Dave, appreciate you being here as well, and your questions and participation in that. And we're gonna start trying to do these things once a month and just give a little idea that is some practical ministry helps, things for churches to think about and dialogue around a little bit. And so thanks for helping us launch this first one. And we'll make this video available to everybody who wasn't here today. So anything else before
Can it be available beyond your association?
Absolutely. I'll send a link to you, and then you can share it.
Put it on Facebook and see who.
Yeah. Some of the things that we do, if we talk about things that are a little bit more sensitive, I'm a little more cautious with the videos, and they got to have a link, got to have a password, and that kind of stuff. But this, I'll make it where it can be seen by anybody that could benefit from it. Well, all right. Well, tell you what, Dave, would you pray for us as we get ready to wrap up here?
I sure will. Father, we thank you for the gift of prayer. We thank you for the privilege that we have of coming before your throne and confessing sin and praising and honoring you and remembering and celebrating your attributes, and of course bringing our needs and our burdens. Father, I thank you for Dr. Crawford today. I thank you for his insight and for his experience. I thank you for what he's been able to share in order to encourage us to make prayer a priority, not just individually, but as a church. And so, Father, we pray that we would take that to heart, that we would be able to equip and encourage our people to begin this ministry of prayer walking through our churches, through our neighborhoods, through different areas here in our communities. God, I pray that certainly for our area here in Nocona. I pray that for Bowie, for Ken, and for his church, and for other churches in that area. God, we just pray that you would continue to bless us, and that we would take great pleasure in being able to commune with you through prayer. We thank you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank
you, gentlemen.
Thank you.